just got this message popped up, recording in progress.
Yeah.
Everybody
Yeah.
okay? Okay.
That was me. Apologies, Mayor. That was my backup recording.
Oh, okay, no problem. Okay, so I'll call the meeting to order, and I will turn it over to either Nancy or Ron. Not sure who's going to be speaking.
You're muted in the conference
You're
room.
muted.
The conference room is muted.
Hi, Natalie.
Hi, I was muted too.
Are you guys in the conference room able to hear us?
How about now?
There we go.
Yeah,
There
there
we
we
go.
go.
There we are.
Okay.
still
It
got
was
that.
working fine just earlier, so I don't know. Thank you, Mr. Mayor and City Council. Glad we got through the technical difficulties, hopefully. So what we've got this afternoon is a work session tied to our storm drainage utility for the rate structure, to go over the rate structure, a proposed new methodology for rate structure. So from today, I guess everybody's aware that we're updating the storm drainage master plan. David Evans and Associates, who Natalie is with David Evans, is here. And then Steve Donovan from Donovan Enterprises is the financial piece to the master planning process, are both with us today. One of the things we wanted to do before we presented the draft of the storm drainage master plan was to go through the utility rates and kind of a funding overview of why we're looking at those and what we're proposing, or at least looking to council to give a little guidance and direction on, based on the capital piece of the storm drainage master plan. They've got that done. David Evans has that done. It's fairly extensive. As you know, our storm rates right now are fairly minimal that we charge. Also tied with that are the regulations that we're seeing coming out of DEQ, water quality, and the things that we're required to do and will be required to do, and the cost associated with that. So on the agenda, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so that everybody can see what we're talking about here. And bear with me a minute. Natalie, by chance, do you have the agenda handy?
Let me see what I can pull up. Atalia, do you have the presentation?
I do.
Yeah, Atalia, if you want to run, I'm sorry, I didn't realize you were here. Atalia is also with us from David Evans. If you want to run the PowerPoint, that would be great.
Sure, let me share my screen.
Perfect. We can just slide on to slide 2. Can everybody see that okay?
Yep.
Okay. Yep. So basically the agenda, storm drainage master plan, I kind of give you an overview of that. We've gone through the modeling process, looked at areas of deficiencies, kind of looking at our outer areas on what needs to be done in terms of storm drainage as the city continues to develop. We spent pretty extensive time looking at our drainage that goes to the Albany Canal. One of the things back in the day, we were under an agreement with Albany to look for alternatives to remove our storm drainage from the canal, and we've gone through that process as well. What you'll see today is basically a proposal to switch from a parcel-based rates to equivalent service unit-based rates. We'll give you some examples, some comparisons. Feel free to jump in at any time, ask questions as we go through, and we can slide to the next one. And I won't give you too much more in terms of the overview of the storm drainage master plan. It's our intent, once we've got a methodology determined, if we change methodologies or if we stay with the same, we will come back to the city council with a draft of this and do an actual work session of what was done with the new storm drainage master plan. Our old one was from 1989, so it was definitely time to get a new one put together. So with that, I think I will turn it over to Steve Donovan from Donovan Enterprises and let him kind of walk you through. Steve works with a lot of communities on rate analysis and rate structures through their utility funds. So with that, I'll turn it over to Steve.
Thanks, Ron. Good afternoon, everybody. First and foremost, we want to talk about your current rate methodology. And you heard Ron say a parcel-based methodology. And what that means is you've got single-family residentials are one class, and they pay the same charge of $3.66 a month, regardless of development or non-development. And then you've got the commercial side, multifamily. Anything of a quarter acre or less gets charged a rate. Then anything between a quarter acre and a half an acre gets a rate. And then anything over a half an acre gets a rate, without regard to the density of development. And in stormwater, impervious surface is the measure that we use for the density of development. And that's the cause of the stormwater runoff. So your rate structure doesn't recognize density of development. And that's kind of rare. And I'm going to run you through why it's rare and why it's frankly not fair. And then we're going to talk about what other communities in the region are doing. So let's talk about the impervious surface and that equivalent service unit. What that represents is the amount of impervious surface on the average single family home or parcel in your city. And for our analysis, we've used 2,500 square feet as our walking around number. I'm going to show you some other examples of other cities that use that too. So if Italia, if we can go to the next screen, we can give you some pithy values of this. Here's a sample screen grab of a parcel map, and you can see the outlines of the single family homes, the roof lines and the parking structures. So there you go. And now you're going to ask yourself the question, how do we know it's 2,500 square feet? Where's that coming from? Well, we don't know. But what we're going to do is we're going to take a representative sample of about 30 parcels, and we will measure them. And we'll create a sampling method such that we'll have 95% confidence that the averages that we get from that sample will approximate the entire population of single-family homes in the city. And that sample size will vary depending on that confidence interval. And that's how many other communities do it. And you'll say, well, how on earth do you measure it? Well, technology has really advanced over the last 30 years to the point where your GIS layer, they can measure the impervious surface of almost every parcel in the city nowadays, and particularly with the commercial and the industrial parcels. And I'll leave that if you got specific questions, the David Evans folks and Ron can talk about that. But now we can measure things. And when we make rates, when we can measure something, we're over the moon. That is really, really good. Think about water. How do we measure the water? Well, we put it through a meter, right? So go ahead, next slide, Italia. Now let's take an example of applying this equivalent service unit to something other than a single family. And in this case, Italia, get a really nice grab here of a sample commercial property of 67,500 square feet of measured impervious surface, 1.55 acres. Well, 67,500 square feet divided by 2,500 equals 27 equivalent service units. We've got a linkage now between our unit of service and the cost that we recover for that service. And that's kind of rate making. Go ahead, Italia. Now I want to compare our methodology that we're proposing to your current rate structure, and we'll find out where the anomalies are. Next slide. So the blue line here is how you charge currently for a small commercial. Remember that quarter acre or less? And Italia, can you take your cursor and drive it over the 80% line and bring it up and down? There you go. And why am I focusing on 80%? Well, in urban planning, commercial developments generally have about 80% impervious. That's kind of the standard for commercial and fully developed properties. We have some that go even more, and I'm sure you've driven into a 7-Eleven or a gas station, and there is nothing but impervious surface. So in this case, and this is really kind of cool, this $13.26 you charge to every parcel in this class, regardless of their impervious surface. If we think most of these parcels are about 80% impervious, circle around that 1275. That's not a bad fit, frankly, for that small parcel. Your current rate is pretty close to what we think is the cost of service-based rate. So let's go on to the next one. This is a really small property. Now let's take a look at the half-acre parcel. Regardless of the amount of impervious surface that we think or will measure for that type of property, you're overcharging them. You're charging them $33.17 a month. And in all cases of impervious surface measure, you're over that. So these folks are getting overcharged under your current rate structure. Go ahead, Italia. Same thing with the 1 acre parcel. This $72.95, which you're charging now, is over what any level of impervious surface charge we would propose to. So once again, this guy's being overcharged. The small properties are being overcharged. Now let's take a look at the large properties. For a 2 acre parcel of 2 acres of impervious surface, pardon me, of $72.95 is the current charge. If you go to that 80% level, they should be charged $102. So they're getting a great deal on a 2 acres of impervious surface. Go ahead, next one. 5 acres, it gets even crazier. They should be paying $255. You're charging them $72.95. The larger the parcel, the larger the density development, the larger the discount, or pardon me, the subsidy they're getting from the single families and from the small parcels. And let's take a really big one, a 10 acre parcel or 10 acres of impervious surface. $510 is what they would be charged at our current calculation of 80%. They're charged $73. Now, you probably ask, wow, that's a lot of land, 10 acres. What would that be? Well, that would be a big box retailer. Pick a choice. You know who they are, with a 4 acre building and a 6 acre parking lot. And they are out there. And I'm not going to pick a name of them, but big box retailers do come in 10 acre parcels. So go ahead, Talia. Here is what other communities are charging for stormwater services per equivalent service unit. In other words, the single family residential. And as you can see, your rates are very, very low. And your program is really remedial. You've got, you generate about less than $500,000 a year in revenue, and you have 1.25 FTEs committed to the program on a regular basis. So this is really baby steps of what we're doing right now. Go ahead. Let's talk about how other communities establish their rate methodologies. Now, in this case, you'll see, Natalia, can you just circle the cities? It's Albany, Corvallis, Eugene, Salem, and Springfield. I just picked them because they look pretty close. I also want to point out that Brownsville and Sweet Home down the street from you don't charge for stormwater at all. So they're smaller towns, but they don't charge anything. But these towns do, and like Ron pointed out, the regulations that come down for communities over a population of 10,000, as you are getting more stringent and they're being more enforced. Now, the definition of the equivalent service unit, remember we use 2,500 square feet is our walking around number for this analysis. They range between a low in Corvallis of 2,750 and a high of 3,200 square feet in Albany. We will have the ability to measure what that ESU will be based on sampling. So we'll know what that would be if you choose to go this way. Now look at the rates, and here's where we start having a real diversity of how things are charged. But all of these communities use impervious surface as the driver for their rate structure, and that's really what we wanted to point out today. You look at Albany, they have a monthly base charge of $8.46 and has nothing to do with the impervious surface. That's a flat fee that covers their fixed cost of billing and program costs. They do have an impervious surface charge of $4.33 to bring it to $12.79. Corvallis, they only charge on impervious surface. Eugene being Eugene, they're pretty unique. They have a 64-cent fixed charge, a $12.64 impervious charge, and then a $2.17 additional charge for what they call their street program. And what they're talking about there is, quote, the stormwater impacts on their streets in terms of maintenance. Between us kids, it's just a revenue source for their street maintenance program, because we all know that gas and motor fuel taxes do not even come close to paying for your street maintenance. You struggle with that all the time. So this is a way of generating revenue for their street maintenance program. Salem, large fixed charge and a $7.18 impervious charge. Now look at Springfield. They charge $15.62. And I called down there, talked to the program manager and said, what do you do with that money? And in addition to standard storm and surface water management, they also fund their fall leaf pickup program with stormwater money, which is very popular in Springfield, by the way. Citizens can rake up their leaves, put them in compostable bags, and city crews will pick them up. And they're thinking that if they keep the catch basins clear, they won't get localized flooding because of leaves. They also, in the spring, have a spring cleanup program where your large bulky items and household hazardous waste type items, the city will pick those up. The thinking there that hazardous waste and or solid waste that gets dumped into the creeks and into the roadways is causing water quality problems in the stormwater. So it's better to help get rid of that on the front end. So that's just an example of what they do with their money. Now, go ahead, Atalia. Let's take a look at, this is the commercial side, and I apologize for the small font, but once again, impervious surface is the driver. And in the case of Albany, Corvallis, and Salem, where you see the check boxes, they simply take the amount of measured ESUs times the rate per ESU, and that's the charge that goes to the commercial customer. For Eugene, they have a little twist on it. They have a fixed charge of $2.03, an impervious charge of $4.36 per 1,000 square feet of measured impervious surface, and then $1.55 per 1,000 square feet for their street maintenance. Springfield, they did something kind of like you did, where you've got small, medium, and large, except they drove it based on the amount of impervious surface for those light, moderate, heavy, and extra heavy type uses. So what I'm really showing you here is there's lots of ways to make rates, but the real driver here is most of the communities in Oregon, Washington, and well, California too, use impervious surface as the driver. And right now you don't. So next slide. What we want to pitch to you today is we want to take your temperature. Is this something that you would be interested in us following up on? Because if you're not, then we got to go to plan B. So I'm going to give it back to Ron. You can get rid of the screen now and let's have a conversation about this. Mayor?
Thanks, Steve. So as I said earlier, the goal of this would be to get a council consensus on direction before we took off on a new methodology like Steve showed you today. There's pretty extensive work involved in that, and if council's interested in moving that direction, we would move that direction to change methodologies. If not, like Steve said, we would go back to plan B. So I'll open it up for comments, questions. I mean, what's everybody think about this?
I have a question, and it might be very elementary, but the question is the impervious meaning that water cannot go into the ground. Is that correct? Is that the concept? So basically, you're creating water that needs to go somewhere, because when it rains, it's got to go somewhere. And that's what the impervious part is that there's nowhere to go on your property for that percentage of it. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, I just want to clarify that. Thank you. Anybody else?
I like the idea of going to a more fair methodology. So I like the direction you're headed.
One
Okay.
thing I did want to point out here is we're not proposing a rate increase to go to this methodology. We would hold the single family rate constant, but we would recalibrate everybody so that I want to point out here, the small commercials that you've got now that we pointed out, they might get a slight rate decrease, but your large parcels with a whole lot of impervious surface, they're going to see some big increases, and it's going to come back in terms of substantial increases to their current stormwater bills, and you need to be aware of that.
Yeah, that will be the big thing. I think your single family residential is gonna stay about the same, but where the increase is gonna come is on the industrial commercial side, and for the larger parcels. So keep that in mind when we move through this. I mean, obviously, the goal was not to it's to make it as fair as possible, and impervious surface is the best way, at least in my opinion, and you can see from other cities that's the best way to tackle that.
Ron, do you have a sense of which properties this is going to most adversely affect, and a temperature for what that means for you as a staff or us as a council? I mean, do you have a sense of how many people this is going to affect?
I don't, and that's where we've got a lot of homework to do in terms of the methodology. But I think if you go back to those charts, I mean, if you can go back to the charts, and I can email this out to the council, what we presented here today, you're going to see those 2 acre and above parcels, you know, mostly commercial industrial, big apartment complexes, your box stores, retail, industrial are going to see an increase based on the graphs that we showed today. So you can kind of get a feel for where those are at. Like right now, like Steve said, we charge about 70, I want to say 72 something for anybody over a certain size. There's the potential there for some of those to grow into the 500 to 700, depending on size and impervious surface. So yes, and what are we going to see from that? I can't imagine any business, industrial, commercial, or anybody jumping up and down and saying, "Wow, this is great! Please charge me more." Right? And that's not the intent of this. The intent is to make it a little more fair for everyone. And again, it's not an increase in rates. It may generate a little bit more. I don't know. But it's not a true increase. It's basically, we need to square things up so it's a little more fair.
I'm concerned about the timing. We just had a water rate increase across the city, and there was a lot of people screaming about that. And I'm concerned that the industrial are really going to scream.
It's possible, and the council needs to be aware of that.
Yep.
And I mean, you guys will get hit with it just as we will get hit with it. So I guess that's the whole intent of the work session. If that's not something that council wants to do at this point, that's not something we would add to the master planning process. And we won't go through because I'll be honest, it's an extensive staff time and consultant time to go through the methodology update.
Sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead, Michelle, go ahead. You might ask the same questions I have anyway.
On the flip side, though, there could be a decrease. It looked like, I can't remember the residential home sizes or plot sizes, but there could be a decrease for residents that were paying over that 80%. Am I correct on that?
No, no. The residents will all pay the same. The single family will always be $3.66. It's the commercial quarter acre, half acre, and potentially 1 acres that could recognize some reductions depending on their impervious surface, because we saw that they were being overcharged on your current rate structure. So
I apologize. I understand. It's the small business, the small business owners that would
small
see
businesses
that,
could get a break.
that
Exactly.
break. Okay. Because at this point, my understanding from your presentation is they are in a way subsidizing the larger.
Not in a way, absolutely they are subsidized.
Okay. Thank you. One more thing, actually, Ron, can you mentioned at the beginning, you mentioned new or evolving like legislation or things that might cause us in the future to have to possibly invest more in our stormwater system. What does that look like? Can you touch on that for us?
Yes, so I can give you some prime examples of where that happens. So Lebanon is not an MS4 community, so we're fortunate in that respect, meaning our stormwater requirements, we're still under the TMDL, total maximum daily load for the Willamette River. So we still have things that we have that are required there with stormwater management. But anytime we do a project where we have to, let's say there's a little bit of wetlands associated with that project, the trigger for that is a permit. So once we have that permit, DEQ water quality then has an opportunity to say, hey, you shall do this as part of your project. So two projects that come to mind, Airport Road that we did several years ago, had to mitigate a few wetlands. With that, DEQ water quality required us to do treatment of the entire impervious surface out there. That cost us, I want to say, in the neighborhood of $450,000 extra on top of that to build those swales and do that stuff. Same thing's happening with the West Side Interceptor as we rebuild Walker Road. Rather than just put the street back as is, we're having to either build swales and when you think, oh, it's just a ditch, well, it's not. It's got drain pipe in it. It's got all kinds of layers of soil and drain rock, and to the tune of, again, probably $400,000 additional with that. Well, we're fortunate in both of those projects that one was paid for with urban renewal funds, and the other one is being paid for through the CWSRF Clean Water Revolving Loan Fund with the West Side Interceptor. But if that was a standalone project, then your storm system or your storm utility is then going to be responsible for that. So you can see what we generate in a year. It's less than 500,000. We've got staff, we've got equipment purchases and different things just for pure maintenance of the system. So to try and capture capital in order to do the, I'll call them unfunded mandates, because that's how they feel to us, it costs an enormous amount of money. And it's only going to get worse, what we're seeing, with the testing of outfalls, and it's not going to get cheaper by any way. So does that kind of help you with that?
Yes, that's helpful. Thank you. Like I said, I just wanted like a bird's eye overview of what might be coming. So thanks.
Most of my questions, I think, have been asked, or I'm trying to understand this a little bit better. But you mentioned the cost of continuing this study. Could you share those some of those thoughts and or numbers with us?
So continuing the
to dig deeper into
the methodology.
Yes.
Well, it would require us to do the sampling. You're talking about having us incorporate that into the master plan, what the methodology was. We'll have to look at, you're gonna have to look at each parcel. Residential, single family residential is pretty, we can take, like Steve said, a snapshot of that. but it's going to require some GIS time, some staffing time. As far as cost, I don't have a cost in my head right now of what that will be. I'm thinking more in terms of the man hours to put it together. You're going to be looking at everything that's not single family residential is going to have to be looked at, based on parcel size. So when you start looking at all those and you're thinking about the tedious time that's going to take to do that, we just want to make sure that we're headed down the right path. And if this is not a path that the city council wants to go down, and there's nothing that says we have to implement this when we're done either. But if it's hey, we don't even want to think about this right now, then we won't entertain going down that road at this point, if that makes sense.
Sure, absolutely. So why has this come up now and not before and or not later?
I got it. I can take
Well,
that one.
go ahead, Steve.
It's because part of the master plan, when we were looking at this, it's me, Mr. G, it's me. I was the one, I'm the guilty party. Insert the spear here. I was going through the master plan. I was going through your current revenue structures because we were going to write the standard. Here's how you pay for $24 million worth of proposed capital improvements. And your rate structure just jumped off the page at me as being, first, kind of unique, and second, really pretty unfair. And that's where it's coming from. It came from me.
And my final question is, it might be too soon for this, so you can tell me, how would we explain this to my parents? How do we explain this to the community that we're doing this change, and that yes, maybe your single family home won't be affected, but others will?
Sure, I'll take that question all day long. It's basic fairness. Right now, small parcels and single family residential customers, although they're paying a very small rate, are clearly subsidizing the large parcels with a lot of impervious surface on them. And it's just a basic question of fairness. And it's a great opportunity right now, while your rates are low, to implement this program. Yes, you're going to get a lot of beef from those folks. But if your rates were $15 or $20, like all those other communities we saw, that $500 for a big parcel that Ron just talked about, that might be $2,000. So here's a great opportunity to get going on this, because your costs, as Ron pointed out, are only going up over time. It's best to get a fair rate structure in place now, and as you start going on the rate escalator over time to fund your program.
Okay, thank you. I'll ask one more question since nobody else is. I have a home that's zoned both residential and it's dual commercial use. Would a home such as mine be affected adversely?
Yes.
And it's over 2,500 square feet.
Yes, and this is part Ron pointed out, the nitpicky stuff of implementing these programs, all of the anomaly situations. You're going to come across a situation where you've got a residence with a commercial development either attached to it or next to it. And it'll be up to the city through the measurement process to separate the single family component from the commercial component. Yep, it's going to affect you.
Okay, thank you.
I like the fairness concept of this, and it just makes sense as we're looking at the master plan to update it and kind of bring it in line with what we should be doing. Just picking a number and everybody pays into this pool, I don't think is really fair. So I like it. I like going forward with this and seeing what we can do to equalize the rates better.
Would there be a possibility for this to be phased in over, say, a 5 or 10 year period?
Sure. I don't like to do that. I like to rip the Band-Aid off.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It feels a lot like what council conversations should have been like oh, now I have a train going by, sorry. All along when we should have been raising rates and for our water and did not. And not going to be able to articulate that very well right now. But it feels like, but I agree that it feels like now is the time to get the fairness and get our rate structure right as we move forward into what we know is coming, and to just not do it because people will complain or not like it feels a little weak to me. I can't articulate it any better than that.
I thought the same thing, Rebecca. I was thinking the same thing about the water rates. And then when Wayne brought up the phasing in, I remember when we did the 3% every year, I think for 3 or 4 years or whatever that was a nightmare. And trying to explain that and just stretch it out was very, very difficult with citizens. So I think the Band-Aid thing is a good analogy too, is do it once, get it done, and explain why. And there it is. It's fair for everybody.
Those so this is just the meeting to decide if this is the direction we want to go, and we can have those conversations about the Band-Aid or the trickle once we have those figures back. Is that correct, Mr. Mayor?
Yes, correct.
Perfect. All right. I think this is great.
Yeah,
I think we need to look at it, and I agree with what Councilor Grizzle and what you've also said, Mayor.
Okay. We just want to get a feel for I guess I don't want to waste any staff time or our consultants' time if this isn't an option, and that's I appreciate that. That gives us some good direction. And again, it doesn't have to be implemented, and there are ways that if council chooses to do a phased-in approach, there's that as well. But we can at least gather the data and have a methodology that's understandable for everybody to look at. There's really no decision here today other than just, hey, move forward with that and bring us back something that's really exciting.
Very good.
Really exciting. Yeah, because storm rates are really exciting. I mean,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
You got it.
Must have seen me say exciting.
Yeah. Well, so great. Well, I appreciate it, and I appreciate you sitting through it. Are there any other questions?
I have one quick question and one other comment. If we were to implement this, 6 months, a year from now, or whenever, what kind of difference in income will we be looking at generating?
We don't know.
No, that's part of the study.
Yep, we don't know.
Okay, then the last comment I have is I'd love for us to keep this in mind, if possible, and that is no matter what we come up with, whatever decision we make, is a part of that to be that it could be explained to everybody. Whether it be a sheet in the water bill or something that we send out to the community. If we can explain it, then it won't be as harsh, or at least we'll be educating folks on how, why, and when, instead of just me trying to explain it to somebody. So if we can put something like that together as part of this plan, I think that would be helpful.
Absolutely.
A visual something, because stormwater.
And I would envision a public hearing on this as well, and there's ways that we can do outreach in order to help people understand. I think the one good piece that's going to come out of this is your single family residential, which is the bulk, right, is likely going to stay the same. So that's and I don't want to say that that's where a lot of maybe your, I'll call it complaints, I would assume that would be the most of the complaints rather than your commercial industrial. That said, there's still going to be some, for sure.
Do you think that this change will make it more difficult for us to recruit large businesses into the area? Or should it have no impact?
I would say that it would have no impact. I mean, if you look at everybody else's rate structure, and you look at our rate structure, we're still going to be below where everybody else's rate structure is at this point. So I don't, if that's the deciding factor on a business coming, whether they're paying 500, let's just call it 500 for round figures, my take would be that they probably it's about coming anyway, because every other community that they could locate in would be most likely higher than what our community is.
Yeah, and for most large corporations that are going to have that large of a parcel, that's just small change for them. That's just part of the process, just like SDC fees and all the other things that they have to pay. But it's very minimal, actually. I just don't think it's an issue.
Good to know.
Anyone else? Okay. Anything else, Ron?
No, I think that's it. I appreciate your guys' time, and we will we'll get together with our team there and figure out what our next steps are. And I imagine this is going to take a while, so we'll get you some information back as soon as we get it put together, and we'll just go forward.
Very good. All right. With that, thank you, everybody, and we'll go ahead and adjourn at about 12:52.
All right.
Thank
Have a
you.
good day.